Picture this. You want to search for something sensitive, maybe health information, financial advice, or just something personal. Where do you go? Google tracks everything and builds a profile on you. DuckDuckGo? They got caught selling user data to Microsoft. Start page? You're trusting a company in another country with your searches. Probably okay, but who knows? But here's the real problem. You're stuck. Every search engine wants something from you. Your data, your trust, your privacy, and the private alternatives, well, you're just trading Google's data collection for some random person's server that you know nothing about. I spent months using different public SearchNG instances, and you know what happened? Half of them went down without warning. The other half, who knows what they're actually logging. I realized I was just moving my privacy problem around and not really solving it. Well, that's when I had this thought. What if I could run my own search engine? Not just for me, but for my family. Something we control completely that combines results from multiple sources, but keeps our searches private. Something that's always available, and I can even use in automation tools like N8N. Today, I'm showing you exactly how I built that solution. This is SearchNG, though sometimes I will refer to it as just searching. And it's running on my own server, pulling results from Google, Brave, DuckDuckGo, and others. Look at these results. They're coming from multiple engines all in one clean interface. But here's the kicker. None of these companies know that I searched for this. My server grabbed their results, stripped out the tracking, and combined everything into this single page. See this little indicator here? It shows me exactly which engines contributed to each result. I'm literally getting the best of all worlds. Google, Brave, DuckDuckGo, but without any of them knowing it was me who searched. And it gets better. Remember I mentioned automation? The email I got this morning, it's automatically generated search results from my own SearchNG instance. Every Monday and Friday, my server searches for topics I care about and sends me a digest. No human involved, no data sold, just pure information delivered exactly how I want it. This is what true search independence looks like. By the end of this video, you'll have your own version running. To follow along, you'll need a server. Now, I'm using Hostinger because they offer twice the power at a third of the cost compared to other providers like DigitalOcean. Recently, I made a video about setting up a new VPS or virtual private server on Hostinger. If you haven't watched that video, I really would recommend doing that now. I showed getting started and also how you can take a few extra basic steps to help secure the server so that it can be a reliable base for as long as you have it. Even if you don't want to use Hostinger, you should at least take these basic steps. It's stuff anyone can do, and it really will help. I also did an install of N8N and Caddy and Tailscale, all of which we'll take advantage of today. If you just want to spin something up quick without watching, then head over to hostinger.com/MattW and use code MattW for an extra 10% off. And trust me, this setup is going to pay off in a big way. We're not just installing software, we're building the foundation for something that will change how you interact with information online. If you have an extra machine at home, you might be wondering, why not just use that? Well, here's the thing. I used to run everything on my MacBook Pro. Seemed convenient, right? But then I'd take my laptop on the road and suddenly my automations would break. Or I'd be working somewhere with spotty Wi-Fi and my N8N workflows would fail because my machine couldn't reach the internet. I lost count of how many times my search automations died because I closed my laptop or traveled to a conference. The main app on my server is N8N, which needs to be rock solid for automation. When your search engine is feeding into workflows that send you important updates, you need something that runs whether you're home, on a plane, or a ferry, or anywhere else. Now with Hostinger, my automations run 24/7, regardless of where I am or what I'm doing. Professional uptime, always connected. My search engine and workflows just work day after day. This is the second in a series of videos sponsored by Hostinger to set up my complete VPS using N8N, SearchNG, some AI front-end tools, databases, and more. And I'm making sure I think about security the whole time. So now that you have a server up and running and you're able to connect to it, let's start installing SearchNG. I have a GitHub repository at technoevangelist/homelab with all the files you need. If you followed along with the earlier video, make sure you go into the homelab directory and run git pull to get the latest version. Each of the folders in homelab has a Docker Compose file describing the application. Now, I know some of you are looking at this thinking, Docker? Docker Compose? This looks complicated. I'm not a DevOps engineer. I get that reaction a lot in my comments. People see these YAML files and think it's going to be a massive headache with dependencies and version conflicts. But here's the thing. Look at what we're actually doing. We have the SearchNG folder, Caddy, Redis, each one a complete application that deploys with a single command. What used to require installing dozens of packages and fighting configuration files now just works. Docker makes complex deployments simple for everyone. Let's start with SearchNG and take a look at the Docker Compose file. As with N8N, there are two services here. First is SearchNG. There isn't much to this, though the logging block may be new to you. Driver JSON file is the default, but it will keep adding to that file forever. So it can be a good idea to put some limits on that. We're limiting it to a single 1 megabyte file. The second service connects to our Tailscale network. This is what I love about modern deployments: clean, predictable, and repeatable. Now, hopefully you watched the video where we set up the server, but if not, the quick recap is to go to tailscale.com and sign up for the free account. It only costs money if you want more than 3 named users and more than 100 devices. You probably won't hit that. Then install Tailscale on your machine and on the VPS. How to do that is explained in the video and on the Tailscale website. The one extra step I recommend is to go to Settings, then Keys, and generating an auth key. Then put that in a file called tsauthkey in your .config directory of your home folder on the VPS. That part is explained in detail in the other video. The only part we had to change with the Tailscale service in the Docker Compose file was the service name and the host name. The rest is the same every time. After services is the secrets block, which says where to grab the secret from, which is used by the Tailscale service. Now let's look at another file we need. Make a copy of example.env to .env, and then set the SearchNG base URL. That's the URL you intend to use for your SearchNG instance. If you don't have a domain, you can get one on Hostinger or lots of other platforms. For this searching instance, I'm using s.tvl.st since I own tvl.st, short for Technoevangelist. Now take a look at the config directory. There are a few important files here. You probably won't need to touch uwsgi.ini or limiter.toml, but copy settings.yaml.example to settings.yaml and then edit it. The only important thing to change is the secret key. This can be any long string of letters and numbers. There's also the URL for Redis, but you'll probably not need to change that if following along. But we'll go into that more in a sec. One important thing to note is that search formats is set to HTML, JSON, and RSS. The fact that JSON is in the list means that we can call SearchNG using the API, which is really useful. Nothing to change, just pointing it out. Okay, so now that Redis URL, what's up with that? In SearchNG, Redis is used for a limiter and to track which engines it can use and maybe store some more data. The limiter is really important if you're setting up a public instance of SearchNG, which we are not. But there are some other uses for Redis in SearchNG, and apparently it will be used more in the future, so good to just have it ready. And for shared resources like databases, I like to split them out into separate Docker Compose files so that it's easier to leverage them in other projects. So we can look in the Docker Compose YAML file in Redis and see what's going on. All we have is the standard Redis Docker Compose file combined with the Tailscale service. So let's start that compose file running the command docker compose up-d. Now Redis is up and running, and we can start using it in our other containers. Now go back to SearchNG folder and run that. It's nice to run containers the first time without the -d flag so we can watch the logs go by. After I work out the kinks, I stop it and then run it with the -d flag to keep it running in the background. At this point, you should be able to open up your web browser and go to http://searchng on Hostinger and maybe the rest of the domain, port 8080. And we should see the SearchNG logo, and you can start working with this search engine. But we don't want to have to type in such a long URL. We just want something really nice and short using our preferred domain name. So that's where Caddy comes in. Again. Now, here's where I hit a wall. I had set up SearchNG before in an earlier video, and it worked great. But there was one massive problem. It was public. Anyone could find it and use it. I was essentially running a free search engine for the entire internet. And that's not what I wanted. I needed this to be private, just for my family and my automation tools. So I thought, easy. I'll just use Tailscale. Point my domain to the Tailscale IP instead of the public server IP, and boom, private search engine. But then I ran into this brick wall. Let's Encrypt, the service that gives us SSL certificates, needs to verify that you actually control the domain. It does this by connecting to your server on the public internet. But Tailscale IPs, they're private. Let's Encrypt can't reach them. No verification, no SSL certificate. No SSL certificate, no HTTPS. No HTTPS, no monitored browser will touch it. I was stuck. I had a choice, either run a public search engine that anyone could use, or run a private one that wouldn't work properly without a warning. For days, this problem just sat there, mocking me. Every time I thought about it, I think there has to be a way. And then I found it. The solution is to provide Caddy credentials to access our DNS provider. Now, this process is going to be a little different for every DNS provider. I'm using Cloudflare, and so I'm going to show you how to do it with Cloudflare. But I'll also show you what to look for if you're using a different DNS provider. That said, I've found Cloudflare to be a really great solution for DNS. In fact, I've moved many of my other domains over to Cloudflare as my main DNS server. It just makes things really, really convenient because there are so many other solutions that integrate with Cloudflare DNS. But this process won't work with the Caddy setup that we're using in the N8N video. On its own, Caddy doesn't know anything about Cloudflare, so we need to build a new version of Caddy that's going to work for us. But don't worry, you don't have to be a developer. All of this is going to be handled for us in Docker. Navigate over to the Caddy2 directory in the Home Lab folder that you cloned to your VPS, and then take a look at the Docker Compose YAML file. This doesn't look all that different from what we were doing before, with the exception of how I've mounted volumes. Before I had Caddy file under a Caddy file directory, and now I just have it in the same directory as a Docker Compose file. I just do things a little bit differently, making it a little bit easier to configure. But you can see that there's not a whole lot different other than using build instead of image. Build is pointing to the current directory and looking for a Docker file. So let's take a look at that file. This is using what's referred to as a multi-stage build. And right up at the top, we're setting up an argument. So we're going to be using Caddy 2.10. Docker starts with using Caddy 2.10 builder, and we're going to refer to that later as just builder. And then it's going to run a command, xcaddy build with github.com/caddydns/Cloudflare. And so this is a special module that we're building into our Caddy executable that will know how to talk directly to Cloudflare. And then we're going to make a new Docker image from Caddy, just regular Caddy, not the builder. And we're going to copy user/bin/caddy from the builder container to the new one. So take a look at that GitHub repository at github.com/caddydns. And there you can see a huge number of repositories for different DNS providers. Find the DNS provider you're using, and then apply that to our Docker file. And then you'll be able to do something similar to what I'm doing. Now copy the Caddy file example file to Caddy file, and note that the C has to be capitalized. So capital C and then the rest lowercase. That's really important. It's an uppercase C. And then go in and edit that file to point to the different places that you want to proxy. And then create the entry for s dot the rest of your domain. And then in that block, set TLS to use the DNS Cloudflare module, or whichever module you're using, that we just added to Caddy, and we specify our Cloudflare API token. But that needs to be set in the environment for the Docker container. So copy the example env file to .env and specify a Cloudflare API token. Now, I have to admit, SSL certificates used to be my nemesis. I'd spend hours trying to get Let's Encrypt working with traffic, dealing with crazy labels and configs, troubleshooting why my sites were suddenly showing security warnings, and it was always something. But watch what happens now with DNS-based verification. I create one API token in Cloudflare, and suddenly Caddy can automatically handle all my SSL certificates without complicated configs. No more broken certificates, no more headaches. I control my own secure connections without the stress. Here's how to set up that Cloudflare token. At the main account page, click on Manage Account, and then click on Account API Tokens. Create a new token and give it whatever name you like. I created a custom token, and you want to make sure that you add permissions of zone edit, and zone DNS edit, and then under zone resources, include a specific zone. Now, if you only have a single domain, this probably isn't necessary, but I have 5 or 6 domains in this account. So I want to make sure I specify to use this particular domain. Now copy that token and paste it into the environment file that you just created. Alternatively, you could do this as a secret like we did with the Tailscale token, but that's up to you. Now go to the Tailscale admin panel at tailscale.com and find the machine for your VPS. And you want to copy the IP address, both the IPv4 and IPv6 IP addresses. And again, these are Tailscale IP addresses. And then come over to your DNS configuration. In my case, I'm using Cloudflare, so I'll create a new record for whatever you're calling your SearchNG machine or instance. I'm calling it s.tvl.st. So I'm going to add a new A record of S and pointing it to the Tailscale IP address. And then add a AAAA record, that's 4 A's, which is basically the IP address or the A record for an IPv6 address, and set S to the IPv6 IP address and save that. Now, if you have the earlier Caddy running, go into that directory, so homelab/Caddy, and run docker compose stop. And then come back over to the new Caddy2 directory and run docker compose up. Again, I'm leaving off the -D so that we can run it interactively. This may require you to run a second terminal. This is the moment of truth. I'm going to open up a browser and go to s.tvl.st. Will it work? Will all this complexity actually pay off? And yes, look at that. Clean URL, green lock icon showing HTTPS is working. And there's my private search engine. No port numbers, no warnings, no compromises, just a beautiful-ish private search engine that only my family can access. But here's what really gets me excited. Watch this. I'm going to search for Kubernetes tutorials and look at what happens. See this result? They're coming from multiple engines simultaneously. Look at the bottom of each result. It shows me exactly which engines provided results, Google or Brave or DuckDuckGo or StartPage. I'm getting comprehensive coverage, but the search engines only see requests from my server, not from me personally. This is what victory looks like. Complete search independence with zero compromises. Now, if you made it this far, you're probably into learning how to set up and use technology to help move you forward. You can help me out by joining my Patreon. I release videos up to a week early and sometimes with extra content and definitely ad-free. You can find a link for it down in the description below. Now that you have a search engine running, and it's just for you, set it up as the default search engine in your browsers. I added a new search engine in Zen, my chosen browser of the day, and it looks like https://s.tvl.st/search $Q equals %s. Yeah. And since my MacBook Pro is on the Tailscale, it can see that server. I also added the Tailscale client to my iPhone, and so I've set my default search engine on Safari to be SearchNG as well. Now let's use SearchNG to build out a simple workflow on N8N. Here's a workflow that I actually use. It sends out an email a couple of days before a former coworker and I do a stream together, and it just helps us prepare with recent news items. So the first node is a schedule trigger. This just says to send out an email at 11 a.m. on Friday and 11 a.m. on Monday. Next, I define a list of topics that we tend to be interested in when we talk on our stream. So I've got Windsurf IDE, got Cursor IDE, OpenAI, Anthropic, Mistral, Ollama, DevOps, tech surveys, and AI image generation. We talk about all sorts of things, but these tend to come up more often than not. The next node just splits them out into separate items. And then I have an HTTP node that simply does a get to s.tvl.st, and then specifies a queue equals, and then whatever's in the json.topics. So it goes through each of those topics and just calls s.tvl.sc with one particular topic and returns that. It sets format to JSON, time range to the last 7 days, and categories to news and language English. And now I get a list of 9 items back that have a number of search results. So for Windsurf IDE, I see some news items. And for Cursor, I see some news items. And for OpenAI, I see some news items. Then I have a code node that just takes all those news items, and generates an email text as HTML. Then finally, there's a Gmail node that takes that email text and emails it to Ryan and to me. And that's it. So this runs automatically every Monday and Friday, though I could maybe set it up to do more often or on different topics, or, just a nice way for me to keep up to date. Ideally, I would also hook this up to some sort of database that made a record of all the items that were sent to me so that I don't get repeats. Because if I get a message on Friday and then another one on Monday, chances are the Monday one is going to list some of the same news items that were mentioned in the Friday one. So really, I should make that better. And there you have it, your very own private search engine with a lot of really cool capabilities. No more wondering who's tracking your searches or selling your data. If you found this helpful, hit that subscribe button for more self-hosting and local AI tutorials. Next week, we're diving into setting up an AI front end on this same server. And if you're using N8N, knowing how to use the GPU on your local machine is incredibly useful to use Ollama. So be sure to watch this video next. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.